Chip Filson, the Director of the Office of Programs, is here to give us some of the history behind this capitalization plan and to review the importance of this legislation for the entire credit union community.
The implementation of the capitalization plan approved by the NCUA board in October is the third major effort to capitalize NCUA's insurance fund. This deposit approach evolved out of the fund's previous financial history and reflects the lessons that we have learned in the fund's first 14 years. In 1970, NCUA's insurance fund was established with no capital. From 1971 to 1978, as you can see on the enclosed graph, fund equity rose at a much faster rate than the growth of insured shares. The top line of the graph shows that fund equity was increasing throughout all of this period through 1979 at a much faster rate of growth than the insured shares rate. Almost all income during the fund's first 9 years were from the annual premiums paid by credit unions of 1/12 of 1%. Overall, an average of 74% of total revenue during this period went into building reserves. The result of this, as you can see on the second graph, shows that the fund equity to insured shares grew continuously and peaked at 0.32% in 1979. Now, there are three general reasons for the success of the fund during these initial building years. First, the fund was able to qualify all credit unions prior to underwriting the insurance. Secondly, the self-help tradition that was developed during the 36 years of federal credit unions in which they were not covered with insurance continued in the early years of NCUA insurance availability. This self-help tradition is typified by league stabilization funds and the willingness of boards and members to be tolerant of lower than market dividend rates when that was necessary to reestablish the financial condition of problem credit unions. And finally, national economic trends were generally very positive during these building years of the fund's initial establishment. In the next 4 years, a period that we call an era of challenge, all of these favorable factors began to erode. Another significant impact on the fund and on credit unions was the beginning of deregulation in 1978. Credit unions began to lose the comparative advantages they had had in paying dividends that were slightly above those permitted other financial institutions that were limited by Regulation Q. And also the money market mutual funds began to impact and to attract the savings of individuals. The result, as can be seen on the third graph, is that credit unions began to experience increasing losses, and subsequent credit union failures increased dramatically from the period 1979 through 1981. And as these credit union failures increased, the expenses of the fund to cover these failures also increased. As you can see on the next graph, the bottom line, or fund losses, rose dramatically from 1979 and peaked in 1982 and was still at historically high levels even in 1983 and continuing on into 1984. This squeeze that these increasing losses put on the fund's revenue meant that the earlier graph that we showed of fund equity to insured shares not only did not continue to grow, but actually fell during this period of time. As a result of that falling trend or declining trend in the fund's equity to insured shares, the board in 1982 elected to use the only option provided by the statute. That was to assess a second premium. As can be seen on the next graph, two special premiums were assessed in 1982 and 1983. And in 1982, almost all of that second premium went into absorbing the losses and expenses of the fund in that year. The top segment of that bar is the only amount that went into fund equity. While in 1983, all of the second premium went into building fund equity, the net result was still that at the end of the fiscal year, 1983, fund equity still had not reached the peak it had in 1979, and it stood at only 0.29%. Moreover, after the second year, in which the cost of federal insurance to credit unions had effectively doubled, credit unions began to ask the question, is there a better way of trying to build our fund and reach the 1% goal established in the statute? Because of the action the board took at its October meeting, there now is a better way. Through immediate capitalization in January of '85 by all credit unions, the fund is able to predict its income from investments with sufficient accuracy to entirely waive the premium for 1985. Therefore, credit unions will have no insurance premium expense in 1985. In addition, our forecasts show that the fund should be able to pay a dividend on the deposits that are put into the fund in January at the close of the fund's fiscal year in September of 1985. The result of these two actions, the waiving of the premium and the dividend, means that credit unions will have a yield in excess of 14% on the deposit that they place with the fund in January of 1985. This yield is composed of two parts: the premium expense that they no longer have, and that premium expense exceeds over 10% because, in fact, the credit unions will not have to forward the entire 1%, but will receive a credit for fund equity that is distributed in the statement that Pam Bachler has previously explained to you. And the second part of that return is the dividend that we forecast will be paid in September or October of 1985. But in addition to this return to credit unions, the fund itself will become the strongest of the three federal insurance funds. As you can see on the enclosed graph, the fund's ratio of equity to insured savings is significantly greater in 1985 than either the FDIC or FSLIC. Instead of being the weakest of the three federal funds, the fund is now the strongest. And by being the strongest, credit unions have taken a significant step not only to preserve the safety net for all credit unions, but to keep the integrity of NCUA and their own insurance fund for the future. This plan is indeed a better way for credit unions, their members, and of course the NCUA.